Hello and welcome back to Bicyclelegs Talks Music and another edition of Anniversary Albums. Today we're going to be looking at albums that are having a significant anniversary in the month of April 2025. So when I say a significant anniversary, I'm talking about one that ends in a 5 or a 0. So 40th, 35th, 20th, that sort of thing. You'll get the hang of it as we go along. Yes, before anybody asks, I'm filming this the same day as my John Lennon studio albums ranked. That's why I'm dressed the same way. So let's get straight into it and look at our first album, which is having its 30th anniversary in the month of April. It was originally released on the 3rd of April 1995, and that is Thrack by the mighty King Crimson. I've done a King Crimson studio albums ranked. I'll leave a link to that in the description. I've got to say, this was a special album for me because this was the first King Crimson album that came out after I became a fan. Because I became a fan in the mid 80s. The 80s lineup of King Crimson had already broken up by that stage. So this was the first new King Crimson album for me. So it held a very special place in my heart for that reason. I still think this album holds up really, really well. It definitely sounds like a sort of a mixture between the sort of Frost, Fripp, Wet and Bruford King Crimson of the 70s and the 80s King Crimson with Ballou and Tony Levin. Of course, you've got those four here. You've got Robert Fripp, Adrian Ballou, Tony Levin, Bill Bruford, but you've also got Trey Gunn and you've also got Pat Mastelotto. So you've got what Fripp called the double trio because you've basically got two guitar players, two bass players, two drummers. Although the bass players would be either playing bass or Chapman's stick. There's a lot of instrumental on this. There's also a lot of songs on this. It's a long album. It's double on vinyl. So it starts off with the wonderful Room, which has the Coda Marine 475 as well, which has this sort of recitation of all these Lloyd's names who'd gone under, including the people who ran EG Records, who were, Robert Fripp's previous and King Crimson's previous record label, who he was still in the middle of litigation with when they made this record. You got the wonderful Dinosaur. Walking on Air is really beautiful, lovely sort of ballad. You've got Baboom and Thrack, great instrumentals. Then you've got these little sort of interstitial short tracks like Inner Garden 1, Inner Garden 2, Radio 1, Radio 2. In between, you've got songs like People, which is a really cool sort of funky song. One Time is another beautiful ballad. You've got the rather odd Sex, Sleep, Eat, Drink, Dream, which I always really, really liked. And it finishes with Vroom Vroom and Vroom Vroom Coda. So yeah, it's a really, really cool album. And it's the only album that this six-piece lineup would make. They would then sort of break up into little versions of this and do what Robert Fripp called the projects. But when they eventually came back together, it was as a four-piece, and Tony Levin wasn't there, and Bill Bruford wasn't there. So that's how they would be going forward. The next album we're going to have a look at is having its 35th anniversary in the month of April. It was originally released on the 9th of April 1990. It is a great album by a great Australian band, and that is Gold Afternoon Fix by The Church. This is an original Australian pressing. It actually has 13 tracks on it. I know the overseas versions of this album, I think only had 11. So, at least on vinyl. I'm not sure about whether they had all 13 on CD or not. But this was a tough album for them to make. It was coming off the back of the big success that was Starfish. They were using the same producer, Waddy Watchell. There was a lot of conflict. Um, there was a lot of problems with Richard Plug, the drummer. So a lot of the drums on this album are actually programmed. I don't think that detracts much from the album. I still think the songs are really, really good. Steve Kilbey sings them wonderfully. There's great guitar on them and keyboards. And yeah, I mean, it has the great Metropolis, which I think is one of their great singles. You've got Pharaoh, Terra Nova Kane, Monday Morning, Russian Autumn Heart, You're Still Beautiful, Disappointment is a great song, Transient Laughing, Grind. It's a really, really cool album. And but it was definitely a troubled album, and it was a bit of a rough stretch for the church going forward as far as sort of personnel and that sort of thing is concerned. But I still think in the 90s they made some really, really cool albums. So if you don't know this one, definitely check it out, because if you only know Starfish or, the early 80s stuff, I think this is well worth checking out. Next album we're going to have a look at is having its 55th anniversary in the month of April. It was originally released on the 10th of April, 1970. It is the second album by this artist, but it is a self-titled album, so it would have worked well in the panel show we did a couple of weeks ago. Of course, talking about Elton John, self-titled. This was his big breakthrough because, of course, it had the huge hit single Your Song on it. But there's so much good music on here. I Need You to Turn To is wonderful. Take Me to the Pilot, epic, epic song. No Shoestrings on Louise, first episode at Hainton, 60 Years On, another great sort of epic song, as is Border Song. The Great Discovery is wonderful. The Cage and The King Must Die. Just a wonderful way to close the album out. Elton didn't quite have his classic band yet, but he still had some people that he worked with for a long time, like Gus Dudgeon, the producer, Caleb Quaid. And of course, he's writing with Bernie Taupin. It's Paul Buckmaster doing the string arrangements and so on. Terrific, terrific album. I think he would go on to even better stuff as he went along. And the first album, Sky, I think is a unique album in his catalogue. But this is, the beginning of Elton John as we would know him, at least for the first half of the 70s. The next couple of albums have a lot in common because they're both of the same genre and they were both released on the same day. They're both having their 45th anniversary in the month of April. The first one is the rather wonderful British Steel by Judas Priest. This was a big breakthrough for them as well. A really big seller for them, you know, has, Metal Gods, one of their signature songs, but it's also got Breaking the Law, which is, even people who don't really know Judas Priest know the song Breaking the Law. You've also got massive Rapid Fire, Living After Midnight, You Don't Have to Be Old, Grinder is a great, great song. Um, The Rage, it's just a really, really cool album. And, I've really enjoyed getting into like the 70s and early 80s Judas Priest in recent years. But released on the very same day was a debut album that would go into the annals of metal history. I'm, of course, talking about Iron Maiden self-titled. Terrific album, but again, released on the 11th of April 1980, so the exact same day as British Steel. Hell of a day for metalheads in England. Now, my good friend Mike Lodano at Grab a Stack of Rock is currently doing a whole series on Iron Maiden called 50 Years of Iron Maiden. It's absolutely wonderful. I'll leave a link in the description to the playlist. I will say I'm coming up in an episode or two in the near future, so do check that out. But this is a great debut. You've got Paul Di'Anno on the vocals for those first couple of albums. This is also the only album that had Dennis Stratton on guitar. But I mean, some of these songs, still Iron Maiden classics, like the title track, Iron Maiden, Phantom of the Opera, Charlotte the Harlot, Running Free. One of my favorite moments on Live After Death is the band doing their version of Running Free with Bruce Dickinson on vocals this time. Just an absolutely wonderful early new wave of British heavy metal album. It has that bit of that punk energy to it as well. You have a look on the back cover, you can see that sort of very embryonic version of Eddie in the logo there, which is rather cool. So terrific, terrific album. The next album we're going to have a look at is having its 55th anniversary in the month of April. It was originally released on the 17th of April 1970. It is the first solo album by Paul McCartney, simply called McCartney. I always love that cover too. I think that's a great cover. Photographed by Linda. I've done a Paul McCartney top 10 studio albums ranked. I'll leave a link to that in the description. This ranked pretty high. This was definitely in my top 10. And I think it's a terrific album. You know, it was kind of reviled when it first came out. And I think that over the years, it's finally gotten the respect that it deserves as a sort of indie classic, a sort of home recording, lo-fi classic. You know, it's got the wonderful, lovely Linda started off. That would be something I think is great. Valentine Day, really good instrumental. There's some great instrumentals on this album. Every Night. What a great song that is. You know, that would have fit on any Beatles album. Terrific, terrific song. Glasses, playing sort of, wine glasses. Junk is a great little song too. Man, We Was Lonely. I always loved that song. Some great harmonies from Linda on that one. Uyu, completely improvised as he went along, and I love that. I think it's a great song. Mama Miss America, really, really good instrumental as well. Teddy Boy's a good song. You get the instrumental version of Junk called Sing Along Junk. The absolute stone cold classic on this album is Maybe I'm Amazed. Even the people who say, put this album down and say it's a load of rubbish will say, except for Maybe I'm Amazed. They'll even admit that that's a great song. And then Crean Accra, a lot of people poo-poo that one. I think it's kind of fun. It's, definitely he's trying something different. And yeah, great album. I think it's finally gotten its due as far as the critics go. And I think that's a good thing. Next album we're going to have a look at is having its 45th anniversary in the month of April. It was originally released on the 18th of April 1980, and that is 17 Seconds by The Cure, their second album. And one could argue the first album of The Cure that started to really go in the direction that they were well known for, that sort of gothic sound. This definitely still has a foot well and truly in that sort of post-punk of the first album, but it's definitely starting to get into that sort of creepier, gothic kind of vibe. This has the classic Cure song, A Forest on it, which is still one of my favorite. If I did a top 10 Cure songs, A Forest would definitely be in it. But you've also got wonderful songs like A Reflection, Play for Today, Secrets, In Your House, 3, really good song. The Final Sound, M, At Night, the title track, 17 Seconds, really good sort of deep cut from The Cure. I think it's a really, really great album. Pretty much, would set the tone for what the next couple of albums definitely would be like, except that they would go even further into that sort of gothic, morose kind of direction. Yeah, one of my favorite Cure albums. Absolutely terrific. The next album we're going to have a look at is having its 40th anniversary in the month of April. It was originally released on the 22nd of April 1985, and that is Around the World in a Day by Prince and the Revolution. This was obviously the follow-up to Purple Rain. Would make a great episode for my sequel to Success series, so hopefully I'll find somebody who wants to do this with me and we'll do a deep dive into this album because I think it absolutely deserves it. The big hit off here was Raspberry Beret, and I still, it's still one of my favorite Prince songs. Absolutely love it. But the title track is great. Paisley Park, he would name his record label after that. He would name, where he lived after that. That would be Paisley Park. Um, you know, You've got Tambourine, America, Temptation, The Ladder, Pop Life. It's got this really different sound from what he was doing on Purple Rain. He's exploring psychedelia and 60s sounds and that sort of thing, which, he really hadn't done before. Although I would argue there are hints of it on certain songs on Purple Rain. Purple Rain is a definite departure for him as well, getting away from that sort of love man funk kind of thing that he was doing with his earlier albums. And I love, love, love that artwork. I think it's absolutely beautiful. Might be my favorite Prince album cover. Next album we're going to have a look at is having its 50th anniversary in the month of April. It was originally released on the 25th of April 1975, and it is a terrific album by this band. It's a lot of people's favorite by this band, not quite mine, but it would be in my top three for sure. And that is music inspired by the Snow Goose by Camel. It's basically instrumental. There are some wordless vocals on this, but there's no lyrics. An instrumental prog album. I mean, and it's one of their most successful. They were never a top selling band, but this one did actually do reasonably well for them. So it just goes to show that, in 1975, you could do an instrumental prog album and make somewhat of a success with it. It's got all these tracks on it, like Rihanna Goes to Town is one that they still play a lot in concert. But you've got the Great Marsh and Sanctuary and the Snow Goose itself, Migration, Flight of the Snow Goose, Dunkirk's another one that, you know, is a regular in concerts and that sort of thing. The Great Marsh, La Princesse Perdue. It's just, it's a bit hard talking about individual tracks on this album because this album really does play as one sort of piece of music, split up into two because of the limitations of vinyl. But, just absolutely incredible playing from this band. This is the original lineup of Camel as well. Andy Ward, Doug Ferguson, Pete Bardens, Andy Latimer. They all play brilliantly on this album. Andy Latimer in particular, I love his guitar playing. I love his flute playing. Peter Bardens, great keyboard player. Doug Ferguson, wonderful bassist. And Andy Ward, really, really good drummer. Would go on very, very briefly to play with Marillion, one of my favorite bands. But yeah, just a terrific album. And if you don't know Camel, if you're a prog guy but you don't really know Camel, definitely check this out. Great album. Then the last album we're going to talk about today might come as a bit of a surprise because it's not considered to be one of this artist's sort of all-time great albums or anything like this. But I love this album. I really like this album a lot. It's having its 45th anniversary in the month of April. It was originally released on the 28th of April, 1980. I am talking about Flush the Fashion by Alice Cooper. Just before his so-called blackout period, the next three albums were his blackout period, where he claims that he recorded these albums and can't remember doing any of it. You know, but when I was a kid, we had the single of Clones. We're all clones, and loved it because I was a new wave kid, and got a very new wave kind of sound to it, and I think that's really really cool. The B side is also on this album. Is a song called Model Citizen. It's a much more sort of rock and roll, more Alice Coopery kind of sound, and that's what this album's like. Parts of it sound very new wave, parts of it sound more typically Alice. It's produced by Roy Thomas Baker, so that would give you an understanding of why it's got a bit of a new wave feel to it. I think he does a good job of it. Talk Talk is a great song. Pain, Leather Boots, Aspirin Damage, Nuclear Infected. I think there's some great titles on this song, on the, very Alice Coopery sort of songs. Dance Yourself to Death. But I love the sound of this. I mean, he's going for a very different look on the back there too. He's got the short hair, and he's, not got the makeup on and what have you, or it's different kind of makeup anyway. Um, I really like this album. I'm an apologist for this album. So do let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this album. And also, let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on all of these albums, because that is my anniversary albums for the month of April 2025. Please let me know which albums you think I should have included that I didn't, because I always love it when you do that, because sometimes they're albums that were on my longer list. Sometimes they're albums I never even thought of. And I love it when you guys come up with that, because then it makes me go and listen to those albums. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see some of my other anniversary album shows, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my studio albums ranked shows, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see some of my appearances on other people's channels, such as Grab a Stack of Rock, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated bicyclelegs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.